Video, we'll be going over the IRS Interactive Tax Assistant tool that helps taxpayers determine whether or not they can claim a tax credit either for adopting a child or excluding employer provided adoption benefits that were given to them in their workplace. So there is a process to be able to claim either the tax credit or the exclusion of employer provided benefits. So this walkthrough, this tax assistant will kind of walk through some of the questions that you'll need to answer for yourself when trying to claim these benefits on your tax return. You'll need a couple of key pieces of information to proceed through this tax tool. You'll need to know the year in which your expenses were paid. You'll need to know the year that your adoption became final, if it is a final adoption, the age of the child, whether or not the adoption was domestic, foreign, or for a child determined by a state to have special needs, and then whether or not you received any adoption assistance, and if so, which year you received that assistance. If you have all of this information, the IRS website estimates that this should take about 7 minutes. So let's go ahead and begin. So we're going to use the most recent tax year, which is 2023. And the first question is what your marital status is. So the note below says legally separated means that you were legally separated either under a divorce decree or a separate maintenance agreement. And if you were legally separated on the day that your spouse died during a tax year, if you did not remarry either on or before the end of the tax year, you're considered legally separated. Conversely, if you were married on the day that your spouse died at the end of the tax year, you would still be considered married if you were not remarried or there's actually a status here for widowed. Spouse died during the tax year. So let's just say that we're married. Do you and your spouse elect to file a joint tax return? We'll say yes. And then there is a clear definition of a child with special needs. So a child with special needs, for this instance, meets 3 conditions. First, they were a citizen or a U.S. or a resident of the United States or its possessions when the adoption effort began. Second, a state, to include the District of Columbia, has made a determination that the child cannot or should not be returned to his or her parents' home. And third, the state has determined that the child will not be adopted unless assistance is provided to the adoptive parents. And there are some factors that can be used to make this determination. The child's ethnic background and age, whether or not the child is a member of a minority group or a sibling group, and whether or not that child has a medical condition, or a physical, mental, or emotional handicap. So for this purpose, let's just say that we didn't have special needs. So in this case, we're talking about expenses for a current year adoption effort. Did you pay or incur adoption credits that expenses that were directly related to your legal adoption of an eligible child? So before we answer this question, I'd like to highlight this blue section. Whenever you see the text that's in blue highlighted font, you can actually click on it and it will open a separate page to discuss that topic in a little bit more depth. So in this case, qualified expenses are reasonable and necessary expenses related to and for the principal purpose of the legal adoption of an eligible child. This would include adoption fees, attorney fees, court costs, travel expenses, and readoption expenses. And this information, you can find this a little bit more about this in IRS Form 8839, which is the tax form you would use to claim qualified adoption expenses. We've written an article and created a video on this tax form. So we'll put a link to this and any other tax forms that are mentioned in the notes of this video. So let's just say that we did. So what is the year that the adoption became final? We're going to say the year that the credit is being claimed. And were there adoption expenses paid in that tax year? Did you pay adoption expenses in 2022? We'll say yes. Were any of your adoption expenses paid with funds received from a federal, state, or local program or any other organization? We'll say no. Now, were any of your adoption expenses paid or reimbursed under a qualified adoption assistance program? We'll say no for now. We might change this. So let's just say that this child was, I'm picking random dates here. We'll just say that this child was adopted when he or she was 3 years old. We'll say that they have a social security number. It is not a spouse's child. So you're eligible to claim a credit for expenses paid. You can include the expenses that you incurred in the tax year that the adoption became final and in the previous tax year. So you can't claim the expenses until the adoption becomes final, but you do have the opportunity to go back to previous years to claim those expenses. So for 2023, the maximum adoption credit is $15,950 per child. You have to use the smaller of your actual adoption expenses or the maximum credit. And this credit or the exclusion is also subject to a modified adjusted gross income or MAGI limitation. And that starts between $239,230. And if your modified adjusted gross income for the tax year is greater than $279,230, then your exclusion or your credit is zero. So we do cover this in our article, and again, we'll put a link to it. And then also, finally, other non-refundable tax credits may limit the amount of credit you actually take, or your tax bill. For example, if your tax bill ends up being $10,000, this is a non-refundable credit, so the best that you can do is just reduce your tax bill down to zero. You can't actually use this credit to force a refund that, in a year where you have zero tax liability. So we're going to go back and we're going to say, I want to, let's just say we're trying to claim expenses for a foreign adoption. And we'll kind of go through the same thing, see if any other questions pop up that were not previously asked. So in this case, it says that the maximum adoption credit is $0 per child. So that's probably not correct. I'm going to go ahead and back out of this and try to redo this. Sometimes cookies get hung up in the tax assistant. So each time you go through it, it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and clear that out. And let's start over again. So we're going to go through, we're going to answer the questions in the same way. So there we go. We went back and kind of cleared the cookie on this and restarted that tax assistant. And basically, we're getting the same information for the foreign adoption as we did for the domestic adoption, right? Um, so if you kind of go back and forth and you get wonky looking answers, you should probably back out of the tool completely and then and go back through. So I wanted to see if there were different circumstances based on adopting a special needs child. So we're going to go through all of the same information. And there you go. So, the special needs child doesn't really change anything. They're eligible for the maximum amount. Uh, it does say that you can take the maximum adoption credit even if your adoption expenses were less than the maximum. So you can take the credit of $15,950 even if you didn't actually spend that much money because it's a special needs child. I'm going to do one last thing and then we'll sign off. But I wanted to answer the question about whether or not. So let's see what a qualified adoption assistance program is. It's talking about the employer sponsored plan. So I'm going to say that some of our adoption expenses were actually funded by our employer. And so our employer does have a written program. And so basically you can still apply for the you're eligible for the maximum exclusion even if you received adoption employer provided adoption benefits under the plan. Generally speaking, if you're not adopting a special needs child, then you would be able to kind of combine those efforts, but there is a ceiling that applies to the combined amount of either excluded expenses that your employer paid that you're excluding from your income, or the expenses that you spent out of pocket that you're taking away from your tax bill. So those end up being able to add up to the maximum credit, usually this amount. So I just wanted to walk through this example. So that's all we have for this video. Like I said, we'll put a link in the show notes to the article, which you can read on our website. Simply go to teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS form 8839, and you can learn a little bit more about the adoption tax credit and other tax benefits. If you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. And if you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our channel. And if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the comments section. Thank you very much and have a great day.